As I say, good morning and welcome to this second of our update reports on the Regional Water Resources Plan. Just some housekeeping issues, if I can. To begin with, please set microphones off and also cameras off throughout. And if you're wanting to raise a question, please use the Teams chat function, not the Q&A. Q&A should have disappeared. So any questions, please put those into the chat and then we'll be able to deal with those. If you're wanting to ask the question of the panels, then when it comes to, I'll invite people to come in if you use the hands raise function, and then unmute yourself and switch your camera on, please. The session is being recorded, so just so as you're aware of that. You can see here the agenda, and just to note, we'll be having a Q&A after the first panel and then after the second panel, not after Daniel's first report, but Daniel will be joining the panels. So if there are questions specifically for Daniel, then you can ask at that time. So without further ado, Daniel, over to you for the progress report.
Thanks very much, Paul. Just moving on. So yeah, welcome everybody to this webinar to launch our second annual progress report on the Regional Water Resources Plan. As if you need it, hopefully by now, Water Resources East is the regional water resources planning body for the East of England. We're one of the 5 regional bodies covering the whole of England and parts of Wales. But we are different to the other 4 regional groups in that we are set up and constituted as an independent not-for-profit membership organisation, and key sector interests form our board and fund our core costs. And you've got the board member logos there on the screen. I'm going to try and keep my opening piece brief, and I know I say that every time, and partly the challenge here is that there is so much that has happened, there's so much that has been going on during 2025, lots to talk about, but I will try and keep my opening session brief because I really want to bring in the speakers and the panelists who are actually out there on the front line doing delivering aspects of the plan day to day from different perspectives. But the regional plan itself it tries to collate and summarise everything that did happen during 2025 from a multi-sector perspective toward the delivery of our regional plan. Our plan, as Paul says, is now 2 years old, and the Environment Agency, as part of the National Framework for Water Resources, expects the regional groups to report on progress and to talk about the challenges, the opportunities and the risks in terms of plan delivery. As our second regional plan, as always, we are keen to capture your feedback on its length, its structure, its content. Are we telling you the right things about the projects? Are there aspects we've missed? Is it too long and boring? Please let us know, and you can email the team at contact@wre.org.uk. And there's a direct link to the report on the bottom right hand side, and I've just posted a direct link into the chat as well. All the links on the slides today you should be able to access just by clicking those links. Just a bit of context to start us off for 2025, which I said was a really, really busy year. And as we said in the report and reflected, it could be seen as a kind of pivotal year for the water sector and the wider water environment as we kind of move from previous structures, approaches to water sector regulation in response to the 88 recommendations that Sir John Cunliffe made last summer. But meanwhile, it was also the warmest and sunniest year on record for the UK. The whole of the WRE region was classified as in prolonged dry weather status. Other parts of the country were in full drought. But of course, recent wet weather, particularly last month, has started to lead to recovery, and some of the parts of the region have now moved into recovery status. Continuing acceleration in growth ambitions, that really marked the year in terms of kind of key publications like the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough's local growth plan, which talked about the Mayor's ambition to triple GVA by 2050. We had the announcement of the Universal Studios UK resort near Bedford, clearly within one of the driest parts of the country, one of the fastest growing parts of the country. So that will add additional kind of pressures to water resources and also to water recycling capacities. Lots of interest and particularly concern around the water as well as energy consumption of data centers and artificial intelligence, and lots of industrial growth happening in the north of the region on the Humber Bank, in particular green hydrogen with, for example, the Uniper project that was announced that went through kind of the planning stage last year. We also have the kind of delivery of mandatory housing targets and lots of emerging plans starting to pop up across the region. And we're going to be hearing from the Greater Cambridgeshire Planning Service later on in the session about their approach to delivering the new emerging plan within the water scarcity constraints that they face. Strategic authorities under the English devolution plan are really coming to the fore. Clearly, we've got the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority already within existence, and we've now had the Greater Lincolnshire Strategic Authority, but we also still expect Norfolk and Suffolk to emerge as a strategic authority in the next couple of years, as well as Greater Essex. And lots, as I say, happening on the policy front. The new National Framework for Water Resources came out last June, the Independent Water Commission report, and now the white paper that came out just a week or two ago. And we've also had detailed policies that help us move towards the kind of demand strategy within our regional plan, particularly reviewing water efficiency standards in building regulations. And I'll talk a little bit more about policy as we go forward. But just in response to Sir John Cunliffe's report, which talked about national, regional, local approaches to water resources and management of the wider water environment, we've been putting ourselves forward as already essentially a regional system planner operating at river basin district level, and ticking a lot of the boxes that Sir John Cunliffe said that any regional planner should be able to kind of participate in and oversee and help scrutinise. So this is clearly an ongoing conversation. We want WRE to be one of the potential pilot areas that white paper started to talk about, and we've got various conversations going on with government and DEFRA to kind of take those themes forward. But just wanted to flag that we're very much engaged in those water white paper conversations. How does WRE evolve into a regional system planner of the sort that Sir John Cunliffe talked about? So delving into the report itself. So first of all, you might have noticed that we've restructured the report to bring the environment to the fore. And that was partly to recognise again that the environment is the biggest driver of new water resources options that we need to bring forward over the next 25 years, because much of the region, much of the environment, the water bodies, the chalk streams, wetlands are struggling because of a lack of natural flow. And in our report, we've summarised exactly how much progress has already been made through the changes in water company licences across the different catchments, and we just aggregated them up across those catchments. What we want still to be able to do is do this for the other sectors that have also been accommodating changes in abstraction licenses, to produce that overall sense of how much progress are we making toward what we call our environmental destination for flow regimes by the 2040s, because a lot of change is already happening. I mean, one of the kind of questions we already get is, are these license cuts actually making a difference? Well, they are clearly already very sizable and are taking us in that right direction. But we'd like to, in time for the next progress report, have a more kind of rounded sense of how much progress is being made. And in the National Framework for Water Resources documentation that came out last summer, it also gave us more detailed information on how much license, what degree of license cuts may be necessary under particular scenarios by 2050. And the map on the right-hand side starts to talk about how big some of those cuts might be. And those license reductions and changes are the focus for a series of catchment workshops that are already underway, working very closely with all the sectors, all our members in different catchments, to look at exactly how can we accommodate either those changes in licenses through the way in which those catchments are managed, or alternative ways to mitigate the need to even make those abstraction license changes in the first place. And the links on your screen will take you to more information about how we are approaching this key task as part of developing our second regional plan. And we've also launched a new data explorer, which looks at a catchment scale and brings together all kinds of different data sets that we can use to inform those options as we build our second plan. And on this slide, you can see a whole series of catchment workshops coming up over the next couple of months if you want to take part in any of those. So the registration link's there. And I'll also post a link to the chat later, which gives you, the summary of all these different things. These catchments are free to attend, so please do sign up and take part in as many of those as you want to. On the agricultural side, again, I won't spend long on this because Lindsay, our agricultural sector representative on the board, will talk you through more of this. But again, lots of progress on the agricultural side, funded by the Environment Agency through local resource options, including additional options funded under the Cambridge Water Scarcity Group process. And WRE, we are delivering nature-based solution trials that are starting to collect data. We've also got a sister project looking at runoff attenuation features in the Wensum. We've already conducting, or we've started agri abstraction trials again in the Cam, which I know Lindsay will talk about. And we've also calling for options to see, from an agricultural sector perspective and other sector perspective, how can we bring forward investments in different both demand and supply side schemes to help manage the water resources in any particular water body. We're also working closely with Cambridge County Council and potentially to launch a grant scheme looking to support the costs of rainwater harvesting and other water saving measures within Cambridgeshire. And we've just commissioned an update to the reservoir design guidance together with the UK Irrigation Association, so Melvin Kay and Jerry Knox from Cranfield University, because, just to help landowners and the planning system to navigate both the kind of planning and licensing challenges for reservoir projects, hopefully to bust some myths, because it's not necessarily as difficult as you might assume. And hopefully we'll be launching that guide by the early spring, so in April time. On the demand side of the public water supply, the main kind of metric that we use to judge progress is the extent to which we are moving in the right direction toward the 2038 statutory target, which is to reduce the overall consumption of public water supply, including leakage, per capita per head by 20%. And that target is enshrined within the Environment Act. And the good news, as you can see on the screen, is that broadly speaking, across the 4 water companies, we are tracking in the right direction, and overall demand is reducing per capita. Within the region, we have the lowest regional per capita consumption in the country, with Cambridge Water and Anglian Water leading the way. We've got Essex and Suffolk, again, performing very well on leakage, but overall across the region, leakage is proving a challenge, particularly for some of the companies, particularly in the context of a tight regulatory settlement on asset maintenance. Leakage is one of those things that needs constant attention, constant investment, and constant innovation to find new ways to reduce leakage down even further. And whilst non-household consumption, so non-domestic consumption, whilst it fell slightly last year in 24-25, it is still tracking slightly higher than our regional plan assumed. So again, overall, as part of our demand management strategy, companies are increasingly focusing on those non-household water savings. And just a quick plug again for our interactive data dashboard. We launched originally last year, but we've updated it with the latest data sets. And again, there's a link there on the screen. What this does, it covers actually all the companies in the country in England, grouped by region, so that you can delve into the various statistics and metrics, like, and look at what is each company doing on non-household consumption, on leakage, on per capita consumption, all the different metrics, and plotted against what those companies said that they would hope to achieve within their own individual water resources management plan. So this example is just for Anglian Water, looking at average household per capita consumption. And it's very difficult to read too much into individual years' data, so we are looking at trends, but overall you can see that Anglian Water is doing better than they expected against their own per capita consumption targets. On the supply side, again, the water companies, each of the water companies will be talking later about their key schemes, things like the Fens Reservoir, the Lincolnshire Reservoir. We've got desal plants, we've got advanced water recycling schemes coming through the system. So lots of progress. For example, the 3rd round of public consultation on the Fens Reservoir. The Fens Reservoir will be going through the Gate 3 process later on this year, where it's seeking additional kind of support from regulators to move to the next stage, as it nears the point of submitting its development consent order, hopefully in 2027. Lots of interesting work going on around desal as well, so a kind of more detailed site selection process. both for the Lincolnshire and the Norfolk desal plants, and discussions going on in both cases about to what extent can these plants support wider sectors like energy production or industrial growth on the South Humber Bank. And in terms of overall, in terms of our plan, what we're saying within the progress report is, again, we're making good progress, but there are risks, and a lot of those key schemes are kind of nearing those stages where things can start to take longer than obviously people anticipate. The development consent order process is a key stage for the Fens Reservoir and the other projects that meet those nationally significant criteria. That we know that development consent orders can take longer than you might anticipate. But we also know that higher than anticipated water demand will cause problems to the plan. We ran a huge range of scenarios. We tested different kind of patterns of demand and water consumption, and there is kind of flex within the plan to bring forward key schemes and to increase their capacity should we need to. But we wanted to emphasise that it's not just about what the water companies do on the demand side, but it is about government policy too. And whilst we've seen good progress, for example, finally seeing the building regulations consultation for water efficiency, some of those reforms have been delayed. For example, water labelling, the mandatory water labelling scheme was originally touted before 2020. We know, and ministers again have committed to introducing it in 2026, but we really did hope to see that scheme introduced before now. We also clearly have seen growth ambitions accelerate, as we said, through the various emerging plans and strategic authorities that come together. And leakage, as I also mentioned, is tracking higher at that regional scale than we hoped. Another set of risks are around whether or not particular supply side schemes come forward at the capacity, at the yield that we assumed within our plan. And of course, there are risks around cost escalation. Some of these things obviously beyond water companies' control, external factors like we had the war in Ukraine affecting the price of steel and kind of shortage in skills across different sectors, ramping up the cost of different projects. We've also got risk to supply resilience as well. So we know within the plan, as a consequence of having big strategic schemes, that each water company and each water region is becoming increasingly reliant on transfers. For example, obviously Affinity are going to be taking a supply from the Grand Union Canal. The Grand Union Canal is needed to unlock water for Cambridge through the Graffham transfer. So we know that these transfers are being carefully managed, and there'll be no doubt contractual arrangements and service level agreements to be put into place. But just nevertheless, it's worth pointing out that the system overall is becoming increasingly reliant on kind of wider factors. And as we move away from abstracting from groundwater sources to a smaller number of larger surface water sources, reservoirs, individual desal plants, for example, clearly that does potentially have an impact on overall resilience if water companies during prolonged dry weather can't necessarily rely on groundwater sources as much as they have in the past. And there's increasing tension around water quality challenges in the environment. So high levels of nitrates in particular are causing some challenges to replenish reservoirs after last year's prolonged dry weather. So that interaction between water quality and water resources is becoming increasingly important. And overall, if schemes get delayed, if they're not as big as they might have been planned for originally, if demand is higher, then there's always a risk that the environment takes the brunt of that. If those supply side schemes are postponed, does that mean that the abstraction license cuts that were baked into our plan also need to be postponed in order to allow those kind of schemes to come forward at the right time? So we thought it'd be worthwhile, whilst talking about and celebrating the successes of the plan, talking about all the things that are going in the right direction, but also just to recognise that there are risks to the plan, particularly as we move forward into these stages where some of these projects are reaching key milestones. Looking ahead, 2026 is going to be no quieter than 2025. Let's face it. What this chart tries to do is the grey stuff is 2027. But all the stuff in the greens, the blues, and the kind of darker greens are all things that we anticipate will happen this year. Lots of work for WRE, clearly in producing and looking at options and starting to develop the kind of key kind of proposals at a catchment scale. Lots happening on the policy front in the top lighter green boxes, and lots happening for individual water companies as they bring forward new drought plans. You've got updated drought guidance, and clearly as we get into the autumn, hopefully the Fens Reservoir in particular reaching Gate 3 and moving toward that statutory public consultation stage. So I have actually kept almost the time, which is remarkable. But as I say, there's a huge amount to talk about. I hope the report is useful in summarising everything that's happened over the last 12 months. It's almost impossible to fit everything in. We hope it's a useful kind of stake in the ground and summary of everything that's happened. But as I said before, I think it's really important to get the people who are actually involved in delivering aspects of the plan to give them a voice as part of these progress sessions. So for this first panel, we've got 4 speakers lined up. We've got Edward Douglas from the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, who's running basically the kind of secretariat and the team there for the Cambridge Water Scarcity Group. Jonathan Dixon, who is leading on the water resources issues for the emerging local plan for the Greater Cambridgeshire Planning Service. We've got Natalie Ackroyd from from the water company point of view, speaking on behalf of Cambridge Water about their supply and demand side schemes to support Cambridge growth. And we've got Lindsay Hargreaves, because agriculture is increasingly a player within the Cambridge Water Scarcity Group process by looking at ways in which the agricultural sector can support water for Cambridge growth. So Ed, if you want to turn your camera on and take control, you can go through your slides.
Thanks very much, Daniel, and hello everyone. As Daniel says, I'm Ed. I work in MHCLG, where I head up the policy and infrastructure part of the Cambridge Strategy unit. So I'm going to do a bit of a run through of the work we've done today on addressing the water scarcity issues that are affecting Cambridge. And I should say that although I'm presenting this work, it really is the product of some really, really good partnership working with many of the people that you're going to hear from today. And we're really grateful for the continued close collaboration with WRE, the local authorities, the Environment Agency, Ofwat, the water companies, and DEFRA, because I think that kind of that collaboration is the thing that is really driving results in the for the city. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through a bit of an introduction, set some of the context for why the government is interested in Cambridge, and then run through how we've thought about the water scarcity issues that are affecting Cambridge. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the detail that sit behind that across the short, medium, and the long term. So just as a starting point for us, the government's interest in Cambridge it really starts from economic growth. It's been identified as a nationally significant growth opportunity and centre of economic growth, and that's really the thing that's driving government intervention. And the government's made a commitment that in trying to support growth of the city, that growth should be infrastructure first. Most recently, in October, we were able to set out a bit more detail on what that will entail. So that set out the intention to establish a centrally led development corporation, which builds on the establishment of the Cambridge Growth Company as the government's delivery arm, £400 million of initial funding, and then some arguably smaller interventions to support growth, but really important nonetheless, to work on mass rapid transit solutions to address some of the transport issues, investment in a new innovation hub with the University of Cambridge, as well as some measures on the water side, including on wastewater treatment and investment in a water efficiency programme. And just to be clear, the Cambridge Strategy Unit is the team in the department that is responsible for delivery of the government's ambition. So that is the growth context. When we got involved in water scarcity, it was really at the outset of the government, under the tail end of the last government, getting interest in growing Cambridge. And it was immediately apparent that there was an immediate constraint on growth with a number of major schemes held up in the planning system due to Environment Agency objections within the Water Frameworks Directive. So quite aside from a long-term strategy, we had to really think about what were we going to do to sort out those short-term issues, and our first step was really to bring together the people that could help us figure out the way forward. So that, as I say, was to bring together those stakeholders under the guise of the Water Scarcity Group, which Paul expertly chairs. And we did some work to think about what does the picture look like. So the chart here is a summary of the data from Cambridge Water's WRMP, and it really shows us that there are 3 periods of interest: a short-term period where there's some but limited headroom for growth, and then the impact of 2 major new infrastructure schemes coming online means that then we get a little bit more headroom for growth, and then with environmental destination requirements hitting in 2040, we then have another period where we'll need to work out what do we do about that. But our immediate focus was on what do we do in the short term, and segmenting it in this way helped us think how can the government intervene in the most effective way. And the approach we've taken has yielded results. So we've been able to get to a point where those schemes that were held up have been able to be permissioned and proceed. And that's also thanks to the Cambridge Water WRMP being updated as well. So that's the kind of the basis of our plan. So just to go into a bit of detail on what that looks like in the short term, I think we quickly identified this was the period over which the government should get most involved, because it's really difficult to accelerate delivery of major new water resources infrastructure. So our focus was all about how we might help to manage down demand and to supplement the measures that Cambridge Water are already bringing forward. And our plan is broken into 2 phases at the moment. The first phase is working with the local authorities, delivering some retrofitting of social housing and council-controlled public buildings across the area. And then making sure that we have really robust assurance arrangements in place so that we can track the savings that flow from that. And then we have a second phase where we're trying to target other major water users in the city. So we're focusing on business users through a new fund that we're setting up with Mosul. And we're also looking at the higher education sector, because that is a major part of the sort of city footprint. So we're working with the higher education institutions there to deliver a range of measures to improve water efficiency of their estate. And then the other thing that we've committed to looking at is a water credit scheme, which we think may be able to supplement the work that we're doing on water efficiency measures, to ensure that we have a mechanism there that will allow growth schemes to be able to proceed. We are currently considering the case for setting that up, but we focused mostly on trying to get those water efficiency savings delivered, and we're confident that the water efficiency savings we are delivering will provide enough headroom to support additional growth in the period of interest to 2032. Then in the medium term, I won't spend too long on this, because the medium term is really about delivery of those 2 big schemes. So the Grafham pipeline transfer into the area, and then the Fens reservoir. Water company colleagues will speak a bit more about these later, but so I don't think there's much value in me adding too much to that. But those 2 schemes are absolutely crucial, as that chart suggested, in ensuring that growth can proceed. So we are working with the partners and the water scarcity group really closely to track progress and try to escalate issues where we can help. So that's the medium term. And then there's a question mark about what do we do longer term, so where the chart sort of drops off at the end there. And I think that's, again, another area where we think there is something that we can do to help. So we've done a number of things that are referenced in the WRE report. That includes supporting some early work on optioneering to understand, are there some additional water resource options that could be progressed early, supporting solutions in the innovative solutions in the agricultural space and nature-based solutions, because we think that can play a really important role, and also working with DEFRA and within MHCLG on some of the wider reforms that Daniel was alluding to earlier, because we can try and fix quite a lot of the issues within Cambridge, but some of them are wider and need wider solutions to them. So that's really been our approach, and again, we're confident that by leaning in like this and working across the sector, we can really deliver some early results that give everyone confidence that solutions will be coming. And then the other thing I just wanted to reference was that as we've been doing this, I focused on water resources, but as we've been working on this, wastewater treatment capacity has become an emerging issue that is threatening to hold up growth. So we've taken a similar approach there and working really closely with Anglian to come up with a plan for how we deal with that. But again, Jeff may touch on that later. So I think that's it from me, and I'm handing now over to Jonathan.
Thanks, Ed. I'm going to follow that up with how we built on that in our plan making process, working with all the stakeholders in the Cambridge Water Scarcity Group. So I'm the planning policy manager and I lead the local plan team, developing plans for Greater Cambridge, which is Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire, for the next 20 years and beyond. And water became a key planning issue as we've been developing our local plan. We did some early consultations and plan development stages 3 or 4 years ago, and water almost became the number one topic, as in how can we plan for development if there isn't any water to meet the needs of growth. And our members were absolutely clear back in 2021 that we needed better evidence to show that a sustainable water supply would be available to meet the needs of growth before we could prepare and finalise our plan. We've identified a need for about 73,000 jobs and just under 50,000 homes in Greater Cambridge over the next 20 years. The completion of the Regional Water Plan and the Cambridge Water WRMP 2024 was very helpful, but their main focus has been on growth in our adopted plans, and what we've been doing through the new local plan is considering what growth looks like in the future, so adding additional growth to what's in our current plans, and we've needed to explore in detail how the need would be met. You may have seen, for those in the Cambridge area, we actually have now just finished consulting on the draft local plan. So we finished last week, and we've had an awful lot of comments come in, including related to water. To try and draw all this together and to draw on all the information in the projects that Ed has talked through, we commissioned a water supply evidence, so a specific document that could accompany our consultation, working closely with members of the Water Scarcity Group. And this really had two roles. One was to document the evidence on how water supply could be made available for those additional levels of growth. Then also working particularly with MHCLG, developing a dashboard tool that would enable us to test higher growth scenarios and their impact on water supplies to help us plan for the future, understanding those impacts of growth from a very early stage. This looks very similar to the graphs that Ed was showing, but what we did effectively was plug in the number of homes and the employment and other sectors growth into our model, where we were able to test the implications against the current planned water availability in the WRMP. And what it really showed was our next local plan was effectively projecting a high level of growth from the 2030 onwards that we needed to consider. Now, there remains, as Ed mentioned, short-term pressures on water supply in the Cambridge area, which to some extent are going to be relieved with that major infrastructure coming in the mid-2030s. The plan also shows how beyond 2040, our increased levels of growth will create additional demands, but now it's the time for the water industry and future iterations of the regional and WRMPs to plan for that additional growth. The process has been very useful in starting to explore what the implications for water would be. The other thing we produced is this dashboard, which I can't go through in great detail, but it does allow you to plug in different growth scenarios and see the impact. So those graphs I showed you change if you plug in different levels of growth, and that's proving really useful and in quite high demand amongst the Cambridge Water Scarcity Group members to start to understand the implications of different growth levels, but also allows us to update based on water availability if we get additional information from Cambridge Water and others regarding what's going on with the weather and so on, and its implications for water availability. We can actually plug in and update the supply side as well as the demand side. So I think it's going to be a really useful tool going forward. The other thing we explored very carefully through the local plan is what we do about water efficiency. And there's a whole load of documents and evidence showing how we can seek greater levels of water efficiency than, say, the standard approaches nationally. And we've tried to draw on a wide range to pick the best approach for Greater Cambridge. Whilst we were preparing it, actually the government started its consultation on changing building regulations, so we had to try and take that into account as well. But we did propose an approach which really sought to make the most of water recycling technology in larger developments, but a slightly more flexible approach that wasn't so reliant on that technology in smaller developments. Also still requiring significant water efficiency measures in non-domestic. I know we've had lots of comments on these approaches, so I'll wait to review all the comments with interest. We've very much been encouraged by the government, though, to seek high water efficiency levels already, particularly in an area under such water stress as Greater Cambridge. And there was written ministerial statements stressing that under the previous governments, and we've really taken that approach to heart. So we have already been securing quite high levels of water efficiency through a planning application already, and we still seek that already on applications that are in front of us now. And then, as mentioned by Ed, we are involved in a number of schemes related to water efficiency and the programme of the Water Scarcity Group. Particularly, the Greater Cambridge Planning Service is delivering water efficiency improvements, looking at public buildings, social housing, particularly swimming pools and so on, and developing a scheme that hopefully will result in major water savings in the short and medium term. And I'm handing over to Natalie, who should take control of the slides. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jonathan. Hi, everyone. So yeah, I'm Natalie Aykroyd. I'm Director of Quality and Environment at Cambridge Water. I'm just going to give you a little bit of an update, building on Jonathan and Ed's presentations, just to share how some of that is feeding into the work that Cambridge Water is doing, what we're doing as part of our water resource management plan, but the additional activity in particular that we are picking up at the moment. So inevitably, we are talking about reducing the demand as much as increasing the supply. So conscious that there is significant growth planned for the region, we are looking at how we reduce the existing demand for water in the area and how we reduce the demand needs of that future development as well, which obviously Jonathan has picked up in detail in his presentation. So there's various activities ongoing in Cambridge. So some of those are part of the water resource management plan. So they would include our activity on reducing per capita consumption. And as Daniel pointed out at the beginning, so Cambridge actually has the lowest per capita consumption already in the UK at just under 120 litres per person per day. It's really critical that we keep it below those levels and do what else we can to further drive that down. Obviously, leakage is a key factor for us as well. We are trebling the rate of leakage reduction and will achieve the Environment Act target of 50% reduction 10 years ahead of the target date of 2050. So our target is 2040 for that. So we've already got a lot of activity, including some non-household consumption reduction activity, which is all built into our water resource management plan. It's on our website, you know, it's there and it's in the public domain for people to see the activities we're doing. But obviously, as Jonathan mentioned, there is an emerging local plan. You know, there are further growth needs and we need to create that certainty around the available supply. And therefore, we are looking at some additional activities as well, which I'll go into in a minute. We've talked a little bit about kind of the Grafham and Fens scheme. I know that Jeff, when he does his Anglian update, will also pick up some of the Fens piece. I will talk very briefly about progress with the Grafham transfer. And again, I know Ilias from Affinity will pick some of that up in his section as well. But just from a Cambridge Water perspective on our scheme, our programme is on track for delivery. So that would be installing the pipeline by 2030. We've completed a lot of our surveys. We are just commencing the ground investigation work at the moment. And we undertook a public consultation event, which closed in December. So we're collating that feedback now and using that to form part of our ongoing engagement with the local communities and stakeholders, as well as preparing for our planning application, which is due in September of this year. And the plan then is for construction to start in late 2027. One of the key areas we are exploring at the moment is the alignment with the Fens reservoir pipeline. So at the moment, the two pipelines will share a very similar route down from just north of Lulworth down into our Madingley service reservoir. And we are looking at the opportunity to rationalise that either with potentially one single pipeline that could utilised for both schemes, or laying two pipelines at the same time so that we can do it more cost effectively and more efficiently, less environmental impact, and of course less impact for landowners and local customers. So we are exploring the opportunities for that at the moment. One of the main risks to the timescales, and I know Ilias will pick this up later, is around the permitting of the Minworth scheme right at the start of this daisy chain of activities for us. That has the potential to delay the programme if not progressed in a timely way. This is now focus of the government ministerial task force, so really reassuring to see that there is very high level engagement on ensuring that this programme doesn't get any delays in it. So I wanted to just go through some of the actions that we are undertaking above the water resource management plan. So Jonathan and Ed both mentioned the funded programmes, so social housing retrofits, some retrofit activity on non-household, and then a water efficiency fund which will be administered by Mosul, again for that non-household community. We're supporting through those programmes with either smart meter installs where there aren't currently smart meters, and providing meter data so that we can measure the benefits of these activities and ensure that they are absolutely recognised in their for this piece of work, ensuring that that activity is complementary to the water resource management plan activity. We're not duplicating effort, we're not double counting benefits. So we're very closely linked into those programmes to make sure that they are aligned with that. The other piece then is around the Eddington reuse scheme. So this is a scheme that's been in place now since around about 2018, joint with Cambridge University, looking at reuse of water on the Eddington development. It's not been able to operate as a reuse scheme due to legislative issues that mean as a water company we cannot operate a reuse scheme unless it is potable water standard. And this is now kind of a project that also has ministerial task force focus. And we're using this as an innovation test bed to look at how we can move future projects like this forward and use this as a real blueprint for that activity. So we're working very closely with the DWI, the Drinking Water Inspectorate, Health and Safety Executive and DEFRA around understanding what those current legislative blockers are and a potential way forward on that. That's a really key area for us because, as I say, it will lay the blueprint of how we can utilise these type of schemes more widely in future. And then we're looking at new supply options as well. So these are above those that are currently listed in our water resource management plan. We're undertaking feasibility on 5 previously mothballed sites. So these are boreholes that are not in the chalk aquifers. They are on the outside of our patch or just over the border in different geological aquifers. They've previously been mothballed due to water quality issues, but we are aware that obviously water quality treatment has progressed in recent years. So we are looking to undertake feasibility to understand if there's any potential there for yield, but also the environmental impact of that as well. We've talked a little bit previously around, and I know that Lindsay will mention it as well, the kind of local farm reservoir projects and the opportunities there to utilise underutilised storage. And we're also looking at the potential acceleration of an option that was in our water resource management plan, utilising Cambridge Sports Lake, to see if that's a potential opportunity for us as well. We're currently upgrading 4 previous mothballed sites as well that are in the Greensands aquifer. They will be coming online this year, with one of them coming online next year. And one of those we're undertaking some feasibility to see if there's any additional yield available from that site that wouldn't cause an environmental impact to do so. And then they're all kind of very local type options or just over the border, but we are exploring out of region options. Daniel mentioned right at the beginning, there are very limited options in our area. We are looking at opportunities for the River Trent to understand if there's any capacity there for additional water into the region. And also RAPID have been commissioned by DEFRA to look at any potential new strategic resource options that could support and benefit Cambridge. We've kicked off that piece of work and looking at other kind of third-party entities that might be able to support in that area. So that's a very new piece of work that's kicking off, but a really critical one for us moving forward. So that's everything from me, and I'm handing over to Lindsay.
Thank you very much, Natalie, and good morning, everybody. Yes, I'm Lindsay Hargreaves. I'm the agricultural specialist on the WRE board. I do have a farming background, but I don't practice at the coalface anymore, but I do work very closely in water resources for agriculture at a number of levels. I was just going to spend a few minutes just going through some of the things that perhaps are of particular interest to the agricultural sector, and I guess overall, what we are looking for through the WRE, the regional process, is how we can work with other sectors to improve the resiliency, supply, access of water to water for agriculture, and how we can play our part as rural land managers in managing the water resource. And the Cambridge water sensitivity has proved to be quite an interesting catalyst in terms of how we look at that. So I'm going to look at one or two of the projects that Daniel mentioned in his introduction. But starting off really with 2025 as a year that reminded us just how vulnerable we are to water supply. Large parts of agriculture in this region are dependent on water for irrigation. It underpins a big part of the farming economy and the rural economy, and also it's quite important in food supply and food security. So we are quite keen to try and make sure that we can deliver on that by working collaboratively. So our drought supply or drought and access to water resilience was brought under question in 2025. And we're reminded in these very dry years that once we start running out of water, if it's simply not there, what do we do about it? And our strategies really, and we've had many conversations within WRE looking at drought and how we respond to drought. But of course, the real responses are the medium and longer term ones. What can we do? How can we build strategic measures like storage and new resources and water sharing to improve that? And I think the work that we've been doing through 25 and into 26 and beyond, perhaps triggered a little bit by the interest in Cambridge, is really helping. Local resource options have been mentioned. The programme supported by the Environment Agency in this region, WRE helps with the delivery of it. In its first year in 24-25, there were 20 studies carried out across England, of which 13 were in our region, and that's illustrative of the significance of water supply. And in the current year, we're just coming to the end now of another 11 nationally, 6 of which are in our region. And the great benefit of those, what they're really doing is not only identifying what we can do at a local catchment level, but also bringing farmers together. And I think that's illustrative. It's perhaps worth just a comment, that public water supply, which takes, in round figures, 80-odd%, abstracts 80-odd% of the water, is controlled by 4 water companies. Agriculture, which takes about 8%, is controlled by something like 4,000 farmers. And so getting structure and organization into that process to be able to effectively contribute into the regional and the national effort takes a bit of doing. And WRE isn't the only structure that's supporting that. It's playing its part, but the sector is taking responsibility itself as well, which is very important. But it is this collaborative bit, and it's proving very useful. One of the ones last year was LRO studies last year was triggered by the Cambridge water scarcity matter, and it was we call it the South Level Water for Cambridge study. It's based on a low-lying area of the Fens, known as the South Level, and it runs roughly speaking from Cambridge, the northeast corner of Cambridge, in a northeasterly direction up towards Kingsland. It's quite a large area of fenland, all level controlled under IDB management, and discharges surplus water through the Denver Sluice complex into the Great Ouse and out into the Wash and the North Sea. And I guess this idea, which is farmer-led, it was predicated on the thought that there was a lot of surplus water being pumped out of these fenland regions. Is there something else we can do with it? And The idea was promoted, and it has developed very nicely, that perhaps agriculture could build farm-scale reservoirs in this area to capture this water and use that water to support wider sectors. And in this case, we thought, well, can we use this water can it be fed into the Cambridge public water supply system? It's gained interest and support, including from MHCLG, which we're very grateful for, financial support to support a study which will answer the first question: is our idea that there is, or our thought that there is a lot of water, is that true? So we are now coming towards the end of a study there to actually put some numbers on this and find out whether there is actually this surplus water, and also in parallel look at ways at which we might capture that water and feed it into another system. And it's quite encouraging that that is proving quite fruitful, quite optimistic. So by the end of March, we should have some answers on that. Sorry, I'm just struggling to. Here we go. Yeah, the Smart Agri Abstraction trial. That's another one that's being very enthusiastically supported, especially by the Environment Agency. That's based. The geography of that is south of Cambridge in the Cam catchment, where we're working with abstractors there and looking at the concept of near real-time management of river flows and using that to control abstraction. It's quite innovative, and a lot of us see it as a big part of the future, not just for agricultural management, but also elsewhere when we're taking water out of flowing rivers. Is that can we do it in near real time rather than waiting for decisions to be made that can take several days? Can we make better use of the water that's available to us? And that trial is progressing, and we hope to be able to take that through into the summer this year. And it's already teaching us quite a lot. And we've been very grateful for the support from the Environment Agency in helping us with local enforcement positions, so effectively giving us permission to break the rules in order to try something innovative, which is, I think, in the jargon, it's known as a sandbox approach. So, taking a risk, albeit a highly well-considered risk, but nevertheless, doing something innovative, taking that risk to see if it works. And a lot of us are very encouraged, not only that this is happening, but we can see this has got great benefit, not just in the geography where it's being trialled, but also much more wider. The runoff attenuation features work, that's interesting too, and that, I guess, that brings in part of this aspect of land management and how we perhaps adjust the morphology of the landscape to facilitate rainwater and runoff water being directed more directly back into the aquifer and slowing its flows, slowing its rate of movement through the water environment. And I think for me and a lot of us, the great positive in this piece of work is that we're actually taking an objective and quantitative approach. Some commentators have said, well, we know all about this, we've been doing this for years, but in this piece of work, we're actually trying to put some numbers on it, which I think is a great step forward. I put a heading here, the Innovative Grant Scheme. And Daniel mentioned this one briefly. This is a proposal. I think it's going to take root, and this is one where farmers might be incentivized to introduce more local measures to take pressure off the aquifer and off public water supply. So things like encouraging rainwater harvesting at farms, on farmsteads, so that we can use rainwater to do whatever we need to do around the farm, rather than take water from public water supply or even from our local boreholes. And then finally, I wanted to comment on the catchment workshop program in environmental destination. That's been mentioned as well as something. It is multi-sector, it is catchment based, But I think it's very important for agriculture. I've attended a number of those, and I really do recommend them as a means of fully understanding not only the process, but also getting a much better understanding of how water works and in your backyard, as it were, and the sorts of things that we need to do if we're going to deliver the kind of environment that we want in the future, consistent with being able to access water. That sums up my comments. I think it's been a great year for WRE and agriculture in 2025, and 2026 has already got off to a great start, and I'm looking forward to even greater things to come. So at that point, I will hand back to Paul for the panel Q&A.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. So any questions? If you could raise hands, we'll have opportunity for most probably a couple, maybe three at most, but any questions? Peter.
My question is about the Eddington project. My understanding is that at least the original form of the project wasn't so much reuse as taking rainwater off the roofs of the buildings and doing some processing and feeding it into the residences for washing machines and toilets. DEFRA told me in the autumn of 2023, I think, that it was going to introduce legislation to allow that, but I gather the problem is the Drinking Water Inspectorate has found that people want to drink it. So is there any prospect of it happening soon?
Natalie.
Yeah, happy to pick that up. Hi, Peter. Yes, so that's exactly the project we're working on at the moment. So the Drinking Water Inspectorate are very heavily involved with DEFRA on this, looking at what the options and the opportunities are. So it is looking at how we get this scheme back up and running as it's meant to run as quickly as possible. So yes, I don't know what the answer is at the moment, but absolutely the plan is to have a plan and get that site back in and utilised appropriately.
Matt, you had your hand up, but then you disappeared. I don't know if you
I did,
to
and I'm back. Thank you.
Right.
That was a really interesting set of talks. Thank you very much, actually. They were really nicely pitched for a relative novice like me into this area. I was wondering if any of the panelists have got some thoughts or observations for how people working on local levels, local catchment, river catchment plans can start to incorporate the kind of bodies of work that you're all talking about into local catchment river plans.
Daniel, do you want to take that?
Yeah, should I take that? So yeah,
Yes,
essentially,
please.
Matt, that's exactly what the catchment workshops are for, to engage with catchment partnerships, local river groups, to look and explore a range of different options that can support water resources, but also improvements of water quality, improvements in biodiversity. Just how do we restore catchments to function in a more natural way, and also look at the way in which the kind of water resources and water recycling infrastructure interacts with that catchment. So some of the options might be about runoff attenuation features that Lindsay mentioned. Some of it might be about land use change, so large scale transition to regenerative agricultural processes. Some of it might be about moving abstraction points downstream so that the river benefits from water for longer. It might be about moving treated effluent discharge points upstream, again, so that the water courses can benefit from that flow for a longer period. So yeah, I encourage you to, there's a link that Alice posted, actually no, so it was Teresa posted to the chat, which talks about the different catchment workshops we've going on, and the idea is to kind of systematically work through catchments, find these options, build them into portfolios, assess those portfolios from a cost and benefit perspective, and then they become the basis of our second regional plan.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll now move on to the second panel, and we'll be hearing from Jeff Darch, who's Head of Strategic Asset Planning at Anglian Water Services, then Katie Davis, Head of Water Service Planning at Northumbrian Water and Essex and Suffolk Water, and Ilias Karapanos, who's Head of Water Resources Management Planning at Affinity Water. So Jeff, over to you.
Brilliant, thanks Paul. Good afternoon everyone. So I want to give the update in two halves, one focused on the supply side and then on the work we're doing around demand management. So on the supply side of things, people will be familiar with the two reservoir projects that we are developing. The first of those, the Fens reservoir. There's a picture, an illustration of what that might look like on the slide. There have been some adjustments to interim timings this year to reflect the time required for different kinds of applications, but we're still looking at in-service dates of 2036 for Fens and 2039 for the Lincolnshire reservoir. But reservoirs aren't the only thing that we've included in our plan. We are also actively working on desalination. So we have two plants that we're looking at developing, one in Lincolnshire and a second in Norfolk. This is new technology for Anglian Water and to some extent for the UK. And whilst we have a pretty good idea of how we'll go about doing that based on examples from overseas, we have commissioned a desalination technical partner to assist us with that. And then the third supply side scheme is advanced water recycling, and we have a municipal scheme in Colchester where the preliminary design is underway, and that is set for completion in 2032. And current activities include establishing a demonstration centre so that stakeholders can come and see what we're doing, along with environmental monitoring activity. And then on the demand side of the equation, so this is what's really keeping our supply-demand balance healthy over the coming 2 or 3 years. We have a lot of upside pressure still in terms of increasing population. So the population increased by almost 90,000 people last year alone, which was higher than we had expected. And we've also seen pressure from the weather, which has particularly impacted leakage levels. So we had a major breakout following the record soil moisture deficits in summer 2025, and recently again following the freeze-thaw event. But we've also seen some real positives. So despite the weather, we didn't see distribution input, DI, increase much, and smart metering is particularly important in this regard. So we're still seeing a decline in the level of per capita consumption. Non-household demand is also lower than forecast. And the graph there, which goes back to sort of 2019, is illustrating in the orange, and that's the total on demand, that smart metering is playing a really important role in reducing demand overall, but also reducing peak demand. So despite seeing very similar weather in the summer of 2025 compared to 2022, for example, and certainly 2018, we've seen a reduction in the peak amount of water that smart metered customers are using. And we've also seen a reduction of about a half in what we call continuous flow, so which is essentially an internal leak that a customer might have. So we've got some more work to do to encourage customers to fix that. But overall, as I say, PCC is looking really good, and our smart meter customers are down at around 116 litres per person per day, and we now have around 1.4 million smart meters in the ground. So at that point, I'm going to stop and I'm going to hand over to Katie. Over to you.
Thank you, Jeff, and lovely to meet everyone. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of the major water resource investments that Essex and Suffolk Water are making in Suffolk as part of the Water Resource Management Plan. And these schemes represent some of the most significant infrastructure investments that we've made in Suffolk in recent times. And it's going to secure the long-term sustainable water supplies for households, for businesses, and for the environment. So our plan is integrated, of course, into the Water Resources East Regional Plan and brings together 3 interdependent strategic schemes. So we've got the Suffolk Strategic Network, Lowestoft Advanced Water Recycling, and the North Suffolk Reservoir, and I'll go on to a little bit more detail on those shortly. We're also developing the Caister Advanced Water Recycling Centre as well as a future option. So that forms part of our adaptive planning pathway. So if demand grows faster than expected or environmental constraints tighten further, then we've got something else that we can bring into our schemes. So we'll start off having a focus on the middle of this slide. So that's the Suffolk Strategic Network. And that's a major enhancement of Suffolk's trunk mains, so the big mains that take water from strategic points out into our network, and then the smaller distribution pipes that then take it to the actual customers themselves. So about 60 kilometres of strategic pipeline and 20 kilometres of the smaller diameter distribution main. And it's linking the 3 Essex and Suffolk water resource zones together to enable us to have much more flexibility across our supply in Suffolk. So on its own, this network doesn't generate new water, but it's a critical enabler. So it's going to allow new supplies from our Lowestoft reuse and later the North Suffolk Reservoir to reach the locations where they're most needed as climate pressures, growth and sustainability reductions tighten capacity. The second scheme on the left-hand side is the Lowestoft recycling plant. So this will take treated effluent from Anglian Waters Recycling Centre, a flow that's currently discharged to sea, and then purify it using advanced processes, including reverse osmosis, to produce a deployable output of around just over 10 megalitres per day. So initially, that recycled water will be transferred by a new pipeline to the River Waveney. So that will be upstream of our existing Barsham water treatment works and boost supplies during dry periods. But then once the North Suffolk Reservoir is operational, this treated effluent will be discharged directly into the reservoir instead, so improving efficiency and offering water quality benefits by diluting things that we see in our raw water when we abstract from rivers, such as nitrates. So the Lowestoft reuse and the Suffolk Strategic Networks, the two that I've talked about so far, are being taken forward jointly through a development consent order, DCO, process, and they're referred to the Suffolk Water Recycling and Transfer Schemes, or SWRTs for short, should you see anything in the public domain around that. And then the third scheme on the right hand side is a major reservoir, so a 30,000 megalitre winter storage reservoir, and that's designed to capture surplus flows from the River Waveney during the wetter months, and then we'll be able to use that to supply our treatment works in drier periods. So this is a low energy and low carbon option and delivers long-term resilience, the biodiversity benefits, of course, of having a reservoir, and opportunities for recreation and landscape enhancements. So as you'd be aware from a scheme of that size, construction will take a significant period of time. It'll be complete in the late 2030s, and then we'll be filling it for 2 to 3 years before it's fully in operation. So before closing my section, just wanted to recognise some of the challenging strategic tensions we've got facing our Suffolk plan. So we're trying to balance the Hartismere non-domestic moratorium, which is currently in place to 2032, the requirements for the nationally significant scheme at Sizewell C, and the regulatory sustainability reductions required to protect the environment. So the moratorium is in place because we currently haven't got sufficient headroom in the Hartismere zone. So that's one of our 3 water resource zones towards the western area of Essex and Suffolk's region. So we can't support at the moment additional non-domestic demand without the new supplies. So as I say, that will remain in place until the schemes that I've described are in operation. And then the sustainability reductions via the Environment Agency. So they're requiring us to deliver approximately 34 megalitres a day of abstraction licence sustainability reductions. And that's equivalent to nearly half of our operating region's current demand. So quite a significant change there. And so just supports that sort of vital need to be constructing these schemes, but also to protect the sensitive watercourses that we're operating in. And then thirdly, Sizewell C. Of course, as a nationally significant infrastructure project, lots of different groups of stakeholders involved in enabling this. So we've been asked to provide an early supply for the initial construction stages for smaller quantity, and then the longer term plan to supply between 2 and 3 megalitres per day annual average from December 2032. So depending on the delivery sequencing, of course, we're in early stages of these projects, then we will be working on sort of interim license alterations should we need them. So there's no single sequencing that will perfectly satisfy all 3 of those pressures. So that's why our water resource management plan has got adaptive pathways in it. So we're progressing all of these schemes, but we've got flexibility built into the delivery, and we're working closely with DEFRA, the Environment Agency and Sizewell C to refine the programme as the evidence and the timelines evolve. So just in closing, really, these schemes are in place to secure the long-term resilience of one of the UK's most water-stressed regions, as you'll know. Support economic growth, protect the environment, and meet the nationally significant obligations. So thanks very much for that. I'm going to pass over now to Ilias.
Thank you very much, Katie. Hi everyone, I'm Ilias Karapanos. I'm heading the Water Resources Management Planning team at Affinity Water. And I'm going to talk about the options identification work that we have started at Affinity as well as WRE. The catchment workshops were mentioned earlier, so a lot of these things that I'm going to be talking about here have been discussed at the catchment level. So starting with the concept of abstraction license relocation, I think it was mentioned by Daniel earlier. So this is about relocating deployable output from an upstream location to a downstream location where there might be surplus, and looking particularly during low flows at Q95 conditions in downstream water bodies. So basically the question we're asking is there a place downstream enough where if we maintain abstraction but as a volume, but we relocate it somewhere else, within the Affinity region or outside of the Affinity region, would that be? So obviously we should be looking at places where existing surpluses are and we're not causing a problem in a different water body. So that is one aspect that has been trialed within the Affinity Water region for AMP8, and we're looking sort of across the border and across the WRE area to see where this could be feasible. Another option there, which is already happening in some catchments, is river augmentation. So is there a place for river augmentation? Obviously, this needs to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. Where river augmentation does work, where are those places, and where it doesn't work, are there different places where that could be enabled, for instance? The effluent discharge relocation, again, Daniel touched on that. Is there a place where we can create closed loop systems? By closed loop, I mean abstraction and discharge relatively close by, or ideally, the discharge being upstream of the abstraction, and therefore directly or indirectly the water is recycled within that part of the catchment rather than moving away from that catchment. So in our case, and in a number of examples where this happens to take place, there seems to be less environmental impact, and therefore can we be intentional in creating those closed loop systems going forward. Effluent reuse, everybody knows about that, direct effluent reuse, but it's one of the things we're exploring. But I would like to stay a little bit on the dynamic licensing, which has been mentioned a couple of times. Some licenses already work like that, having what we call hands-off flows or hands-off level conditions. So basically, putting an environmental trigger above which the abstraction, either groundwater or surface water, does not impact the environment significantly, and therefore there might be some water that could be available for any user above that particular trigger. So obviously, as we go around the different catchments, there could be some water available for 10, 20, 30% of the time during those high flows that could be abstracted, stored, or put into supply or used for other uses. And that basically links to the one below, the increasing system resilience. And by system resilience, I mean maintaining resilience for the sources, because as an industry and the country overall is moving from a lot more groundwater sources to fewer sources of supply, meaning the big strategic resource options, the SROs. So although there is an increase in resilience in terms of drought planning, so we're planning for a worse drought, 1 in 200, 1 in 500, and so on, the sources of supply are smaller. So we need to have backup solutions effectively. So a proposal that is being looked at here is to maintain abstraction in groundwater sources that are targeted for sustainability reductions through the environmental destination, keep them at a minimum flow. So looking at the art of the possible in terms of maintaining a sweetening flow to keep the treatment plant ready to go, so that when an emergency occurs in any one of these SROs that is potentially sort of linked to the supply-demand balance of that region, to then be able to have a number of sources that companies could go back to and abstract for that period of time until such time that the SRO is back up and running again effectively. So by looking at that, we think that there is a system level resilience aspect that can be sort of increased. Then looking at the conjunctive use aspect, it has been talked about quite a lot actually, but if we do sort of catchment optimization, whether that is the dynamic licenses that I mentioned earlier, or abstracting from different aquifers at different times. For example, if you look at the chalk and how the chalk behaves in a drought versus the lower Greensand aquifer and how that behaves in a drought, because of the lag effect and the storage coefficient in the lower Greensand, there could be some water that is available during certain periods of time in the lower Greensand than the chalk, and vice versa. Because the drought impacts different aquifers differently at different points in time. So it is about not just looking at licenses on their own merit, but bringing everything together and saying, can I optimize abstraction across the board at different times when there is water available and the environmental impact is minimum during that time? And then finishing off with the local storage, it was mentioned earlier by Lindsay, sort of, are there any storage opportunities anywhere in the catchment so that when we are in those high flow conditions, water can be stored and then either piped for public water supply or other purposes, or just released back into the catchments as river augmentation. So there's various things here that can be looked at, and not necessarily in isolation, but these are things that have been explored to some degree or other. Here we're looking to do not just a bottom-up, sort of from the company up, but also a top-down assessment. And through the catchment workshops, these kinds of things are being looked at and encouraged. Now, the next slide, I'll give you an update on the Grand Union Canal, which was mentioned earlier by Natalie. So basically, for those that are not aware, this strategic resource option scheme is taking existing effluent from the Minworth recycling plant, Severn Trent's Minworth recycling plant, treating it again to a higher standard, and then discharged at the top of the canal at a place called Atherstone, then traveling about 100 kilometers south, sort of toward Leighton Buzzard, re-abstracted there, and then treated to potable water standard, and then piped to an affinity water service reservoir for onward distribution within the affinity area. What this scheme does, which is 100 megaliters deployable output, unlocked by 2032-33, what this does is it enables the Grafham reverse trade, as we call it. So 27 megaliters of the affinity allowance from Grafham Reservoir is released back to the reservoir for Cambridge Water to take and feed sort of the Cambridge Water region. So there's a bit of a dependency here between the GUC transfer being on time and then the Grafham reverse trade to take place. So I've put a couple of notes in there just to say where we are, but effectively the development consent order process is within its pre-application phase. We have begun engagement with the Planning Inspectorate through the submission of the EIA scoping report and so on. And at the moment, we have finalized the preliminary environmental impact report, which is ready for statutory consultation. This is planned to start on the 12th of February and running for 7 weeks. You might be aware that the SRO processes are governed by sort of gated submissions. So our gate 3 submission was submitted to RAPI back in May of last year, and all the actions are closed. The key sort of risk to identify here is the lack of certainty for certain discharge parameters from the advanced water treatment plant at Mainworth before it's discharged to the canal. That is the key risk, and it needs to be resolved, which is being followed up with Environment Agency. There are ongoing discussions on this to make sure that this water meets the sort of the right criteria from a water quality perspective prior to discharge to the canal. And I'm going to leave it here and pass it back to Paul.
Thank you very much, Ilias. Thank you. So any questions on these last 3 presentations, or anything you've thought about from the previous ones? If you want to ask, I won't leave it too long. So to take a go. So can't see any questions. So thank you very much for joining us. I'd like to thank all of the speakers for exemplary timekeeping today. They all kept a time which really helps in this situation. So hope you found that informative. If there are any questions that come to mind, if you do want to engage with us, then please email. And I would recommend that you do attend those catchment workshops as well. You can sign up for those. So thank you very much. Thank you to all the speakers once again, and look forward to catching up again soon. Thank you. Bye then.